Okay. Should I start? Okay, let's start. Yeah. So today's topic is hypertensive disorders in pregnancy. You all know previously it used to be called as pregnancy-induced hypertension, isn't it? PIH. Yes. So during this class, please at times you unmute yourself and speak out. I want this session to be an interactive session. Okay. In that way only it will be helpful for you. So previously it used to be called as PIH, but now that term is not being used. So why it is not being used? Anyone? Yes, anyone? Okay, because it is not pregnancy induced. There is no evidence to say these disorders are due to pregnancy. Of course, we see these disorders in pregnancy, true, but there is no evidence to say this is because of pregnancy. Am I clear? Right. So this is the term. If anybody in your exam, in your practical session, they ask, what's your case? If in case, you should say it is hypertensive disorders in pregnancy. It is not pregnancy induced hypertension. Okay, this is my first message. Right. So what are the objectives of today's class? First, you should definitely know the definitions to write in your theory exams. Then you should know the incidence, because if you only know the incidence, you know the severity of the condition. Okay, so what is the severity of the condition? So how important it is for you to learn and apply your knowledge on patients and treat them. Okay, then classification of hypertensive disorders in pregnancy. So what is the spectrum of hypertensive disorders? From mild or non-severe preeclampsia to the maximum severity, that is HELLP syndrome or eclampsia, all these things. Okay, right. And etiopathogenesis. Up till date, there is no clear etiopathogenesis, but we will know what all up to date, what all we know about the preeclampsia. Right. And prediction of preeclampsia. This is very, very important, because we should know to predict to prevent it. Okay, at first if you predict it, then you can prevent it. In that way, as we all already know, prevention is better than cure. Cure is nothing but we are treating the patient. So prior to that, if we can prevent it, we should predict the preeclampsia so that we could prevent it. Right. Then management and case scenarios. Right. See, what all I'm going to say, you are going to get in almost books. Okay, so why is this discussion important? Here you should learn how to apply this knowledge on patient to treat the patient, to make the diagnosis. Okay, to make the diagnosis, to do what all investigations needed. Okay, we can't do all the investigation in each and every patient, definitely no. So we should know which investigations to do in which case, in particular case. Okay, and what management you're going to give. Right. So for that purpose, I provided some case scenarios so that it will be very easy for you to understand through these case scenarios. Right. So introduction. Definition is very important for you to write in the exam. So when they ask what is the definition of hypertensive disorders in pregnancy, so see, all these slides are from the guidelines. Okay, I directly took from the guidelines. And during this session, if anybody is having any doubt, they can definitely unmute yourself and ask me. Okay, so these are all the guidelines. This slide is from the FOXI guidelines, Indian guidelines. Okay, so better write this definition. So what is hypertensive disorders in pregnancy? You can write this definition without any doubt. So hypertensive disorders in pregnancy are the spectrum of disorders ranging from already existing chronic hypertension. We know, yes, definitely the patients with chronic hypertension do come nowadays because of the elderly, primary gravida, all these issues, late marriages. Okay, right. to a multi-system disorder like preeclampsia and leading to the complications like eclampsia, HELLP syndrome, acute renal failure, pulmonary edema, stroke, and left ventricular failure. Everything is possible. Even stroke is also possible. Okay, we'll come to know in the further slides. There is definite evidence for all these things, right? And so according to WHO, 19% of the maternal deaths are due to the hypertension in pregnancy. Do remember this. We'll come to know about the Indian statistics also. This is WHO is the world statistics, right? So in the world, the maternal death percentage is 19% due to the hypertension in pregnancy. Right. Yes, this is the National Eclampsia Registry, NER. The FOXY ICOG interim statistics reveals that the incidence of hypertensive diseases during pregnancy is to be high. Okay, right. So the incidence of preeclampsia was found to be 10.3%. So this is the incidence, and the eclampsia incidence is 1.9%. So why are we learning all these things? Because we should know the severity of the disease in our country, so that we could predict, prevent, and or else if there is an onset, we can cure. Okay, so this is the reason why we should know. According to these statistics, of course, we know that it is a major contributor. See, the maternal mortality attributed to only eclampsia is 4 to 6%. So it is not a small number. So there is a definite mortality and definite loss. See, in India nowadays, we are very serious about the maternal mortality. Okay, so that is very serious issue. So even if we work in a government sector, definitely the obstetricians, they are under pressure about the maternal mortality. If any mother, any pregnant woman died in the hospital, they are not going to let it pass. They are asking questions, what is the cause for the death, everything, and they are putting pressure to reduce the maternal mortality. So even in that context, it is very important for us to manage such patients, right? So yes, classification. Again, the same thing I took from the FOXY guidelines. So today we are going to learn about the FOXY guidelines mainly because we in India we follow the FOXY guidelines. Then excluding apart from the FOXY guidelines, we also learn about the NICE guidelines because I took NICE guidelines. I felt NICE is much better in comparison, NICE or RCOG guidelines in comparison to the ACOG, because American system is completely different. Their equipment, their infrastructure is of course in a high level. So better to go NICE guidelines and RCOG in comparison to ACOG. If you are really interested to read about the ACOG guidelines, definitely you can go. But when we have the Indian guidelines, please do follow the Indian guidelines because India is a low resource setting country. Our guidelines will, our guidelines are dependent upon the resources we have. Okay, so that will be much better, convenient for us to follow. Right. So classification, you all know all these classifications. You can read from like any book. So starting from the gestational hypertension, you know, blood pressure, you know, it is 140/90 or greater than 140/90 mm of Hg, and beyond 20 weeks of gestation and returns to the normal within 40-second postpartum day. So for FOXY guidelines, they gave the 40-second postpartum. Am I fast? Anyone?
No, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. So if it returns to the yeah, please. Hello. Yes, who is that? Please mute yourself. Okay, fine. Right. Okay. Hello. So this is very, very important. Please remember gestational hypertension. You should follow up the patient in the postpartum. Of course, you will follow up all the patients, but especially you will diagnose them as gestational hypertension in the postpartum. Okay. So if you are so sure there is no blood pressure prior to 20 weeks, it's okay. But generally, no pregnant patient will there will be definite follow-up or definite blood pressure measurements like every week or every day. So we can't, we don't know whether they have the hypertension or not, like prior to 20 weeks. So what we'll do is we will follow up the patient meticulously in the postpartum period. And if her BP is normal after the 42nd postpartum day, then we will diagnose her as a gestational hypertension, right? So then chronic hypertension, it contributes 3%. Please do remember, chronic hypertension is also a contributor in pregnancy, in hypertensive disorders of pregnancy. So why I'm stressing is superimposed preeclampsia is 25%. What I mean is, if 3% contributes the chronic hypertensive patients, among that 3%, 25% they have superimposed preeclampsia. So such patients we will definitely overcome. So we should be careful in managing such patients, identifying such patients. Okay. So chronic hypertension, we know before 20 weeks. I highlighted those things, so you can just see, by seeing those things, you can understand easily. Then preeclampsia is a multi-system inflammatory disorder, which is very serious, right? And it is also beyond 20 weeks, but proteinuria, and it should be significant. Okay, significant proteinuria. Prior, they used to take it as 5 grams something, but now the guidelines are completely being changed. We'll discuss about it. So it is a de novo hypertension. Okay, this is a highlighting point, de novo hypertension beyond 20 weeks and significant proteinuria, right? So all these things, and eclampsia also, if it occurs with the seizures, then it is eclampsia. Preeclampsia with seizures is eclampsia, right? And superimposed preeclampsia is occurrence of the preeclampsia in a woman with chronic hypertension. That is superimposed. It got superimposed on the chronic hypertension, right? And what is the atypical variant? Few new terms I want to say you. Few of you may know these things, but try to learn if you don't know, right? So what is atypical variant? Atypical variant of preeclampsia is recognized, which is accompanied by neurological, hematological, hepatic, renal manifestations. What I mean is all the manifestations of preeclampsia, but in the absence of proteinuria. So prior, we used to think preeclampsia means there should be proteinuria, but now no. 2013 ACOG guidelines, they said proteinuria is not the important thing to be a preeclampsia. So according to that guidelines, we can say even there is no proteinuria, but there is an end organ damage, like it could be central nervous system or hematological, it could be involvement of the liver or renal or fetal growth restriction, all these things, any of these, then we can say the atypical variant, right? Okay. So continuation and few more new things are like non-severe and severe. Of course, it's being changed from mild and severe to non-severe and severe. So please do concentrate. I'll try to make it interesting. These are the definitions, so definitely they will be boring. Okay, right. So premonitory symptoms, you know all these things. You will ask the patient for headache, blurring of vision, vomiting, right upper quadrant pain. So all the system involvement. If you're asking the patient about the headache, blurring of vision, vomiting, what it signifies? Yes, anyone? Pavani, can you answer?
CNS involvement, ma'am.
Yeah, true. But why the patient suffers from headache? Of course, see, CNS involvement, everybody knows. So what I want to ask is how it happens. Yes. Okay. See, because of the cerebral edema. Okay. Because of the cerebral edema, all these things happen. Blurring of vision is due to the first lobe involved. If anybody asks, like, why are you asking only about blurring of vision? Central nervous system has all the functions, right? Hearing, talking, everything, breathing, respiration, cardiac function, everything. So why are you only asking about the blurring of vision? Because the occipital lobe is the first to involve. Okay. So I just want to make sure that you know all these things so that you don't forget. Okay, if you remember in this way, you don't forget, right? So the blurring of vision is the first thing because the occipital lobe is the first lobe to be involved. So in that way, you won't miss any patient if the central nervous system is involved, right? So right upper quadrant pain is due to the liver involvement. You all know that the Gleason's capsule, stretching of the Gleason's capsule, subcapsular hematomas, all these things. Because of those things, there will be right upper quadrant pain and also vomiting. Then sudden excessive weight gain. Yes, you know, there is a weight gain in preeclampsia because of the edema also. Okay. And third space fluid accumulation. Okay. It could be edema, could be pleural effusion. All these things we can see in preeclampsia, right? So abnormal hypertensive disorder in pregnancy labs. This is very important. If you only know these abnormal labs, then you can order the investigations. Okay. In HELLP syndrome also, you can see the low platelets. Definitely you will see in complete blood picture. However, you will come to know about the platelets. Okay, right. If in case needed, you will definitely order the liver enzymes. So those liver enzymes will be elevated. And the serum creatinine, kidney function, it will be elevated. And also you can order the serum uric acid. Okay, right. And abnormal coagulation profile. When the platelets are low, you will definitely order for the abnormal coagulation profile. I mean, coagulation profile, right? And two more new terms are, I highlighted them already, that is early onset and late onset. Okay, please do remember this. Same like fetal growth restriction, early onset fetal growth restriction, late onset fetal growth restriction. There also we take 34 weeks. Okay, so it is not difficult to remember. 34 weeks is standard for these hypertensive disorders and also the preeclampsia and also the fetal growth restriction. So if it is prior to 34 weeks, that is early onset. And it is after 34 weeks, that is late onset. And why are we remembering in this way, early onset and late onset? Anyone? Anyone, please? Nilofer? Yes, Nilofer, can you answer now?
To get better prognosis.
Yes.
Better prognosis.
Okay. So it is because when we are predicting the, please unmute yourself, whoever it is. Okay. For the prediction, we are going to use few techniques. Okay. Who is it, Ma? Please unmute yourself. Okay. So, right. So see, sorry for the disturbance. I'm unmuted them. I mean, muted them. Right. So early onset is before 34 weeks and late onset is after 34 weeks. Right. When we are going to predict the patient, this is very important. I'll let you know in the further slides. Right. So prediction. In India, previously there were no specific guidelines for prediction of preeclampsia. Here and there we saw a few things, but now in 2018 FOXI guidelines, this is very important. They can ask you this question because it is a recent update. So there is prediction of preeclampsia. Now they are saying universal screening. Previously, for diabetes in pregnancy, they said it is a universal screening because by ethnicity, we are at risk. Okay. But now even for preeclampsia, because of high incidence, because of maternal mortality, maternal morbidity, perinatal mortality and morbidity, to prevent that, even for preeclampsia, we are using the universal screening. Please remember this. This is universal screening is recommended. These are the recommendations. Okay. I'm not saying everybody is following. We should follow. Yes, we should follow. These are recommended, but yet they are not following. Okay. Because of the infrastructure, because of the patient doctor ratio, it could be not possible. But if we follow, it is really very important, very useful, right? So universal screening. So what is important? How are you going to screen the patient? Yes. India is a low resource setting country. So our FOXI, they developed a HDP gestosis score. Please do remember HDP gestosis score. Okay. I'll show you the score and what is the importance. I'll say everything. Right. So what is done in this scoring system? Careful history is to be taken early in the first trimester. So whenever the patient comes to us for the first time and first antenatal visit, we'll ask the patient all the history and we will give a gestosis score. Okay. See, so if the score is equal to or greater than 3, we will mark the patient at risk for preeclampsia. Okay, please do remember, if it is 3 or greater than 3, we will mark the patient at risk for preeclampsia. Right. So this is the table for scoring the patient. See, risk factors are being given. Please go through this. For every risk factor, for the first 14 risk factors, score 1 is being given. Like see, age older than 35 or younger than 19. So extremes of age, score is 1 for that. Maternal anemia. So anemia is an indirect predictor for preeclampsia. So the score is 1. BMI greater than 30, score is 1. Primary gravida, score is 1. So in such cases, this is 1. Please go through this. And then next 6 points, the score is 2. And for the last 7 points in the history or risk factors, the score is 3. So accordingly, you'll ask the patient, and accordingly, you'll give scoring to the patient. And if it is equal to or greater than 3, in the first antenatal visit itself, you will mark the patient. You'll give the red sticker to the patient in the government setup, okay, and mark the patient at risk for preeclampsia. Am I clear? Anyone?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, okay, ma. Right. So, right, that was all about the Indian setup, Indian scenario. Okay. If you are really interested, if you are at in a high resource setting category, and if you really want to see the patient is having any risk of preeclampsia, you want to predict and you want to prevent, then you can go for all these marks. This I took from AOGD, see, December 2019. Okay. Please go through this. I'll try to explain in a simple way. See, this is a first trimester screening for prediction of preterm preeclampsia. This is what I was saying, early onset. Preterm preeclampsia is nothing but early onset. I'll explain you. See, late onset, previously we used to do, along with the anomaly scan, we used to see the uterine artery Doppler. Okay. Along with the anomaly scan, we used to see the uterine artery Doppler, and we used to predict the late onset preeclampsia. Previously used to do, but now we are not following that. That was not so helpful, we came to know. Right, so we left that. Nowadays, what we are doing is, along with the NT scan, that is from 11 weeks to 13 plus 6 weeks, we are doing a uterine artery Doppler. When the patient comes to us and when we ask the patient for the NT scan, along with the NT scan, we will do the uterine artery Doppler. This will be helpful for the prediction of preterm preeclampsia or early onset preeclampsia. This is what I was trying to explain, the early onset and late onset. Okay, before 34 weeks and after 34 weeks, right? Even nowadays, we are seeing so many patients of late onset preeclampsia, especially in the government setup. In my PGship, I saw so many patients. They were like very normal throughout the antenatal period, and suddenly they developed the high BP and eclamptic also. They became eclamptic also. So that is late onset, like at 36 weeks, 35 weeks, above 34 weeks. Okay. So for prediction of that, right now, there is no screening tool. Okay. This is what I want to clear. So early onset, we can predict with all these things. Right. See. So first thing is maternal characteristics. Is my cursor visible, ma? Yes. Anyone?
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
okay.
ma'am.
Okay, ma'am. Right. So maternal characteristics, you can see here the medical and obstetric history, the detection rate is only 44.8%. Please remember, I mean, see the detection rates, right? Then measurement of the mean arterial pressure. Okay, the detection rate is 38%. These are if we use only one screening tool, the detection rate is less. Remember in that way. Okay. See, only if we see the history, of course, this is like 45%. Okay, good. Only MAP is only 38. And if we measure the placental-like growth factors, it is 55%. And uterine artery pulsatility index is 49% around. So what we do is, we'll combine the 2 or 3. Okay, like history is without any investment. The patient no need to give any money for that. So definitely history is included. And if the patient is affordable, like uterine artery pulsatility index also, most of the patients they will afford. Okay, right, that is included. And if placental growth factor is a bit costly, if the patient is interested, you will go for this. and MAP also you can go for MAP. So if we combine, the detection rate is, see here, it is 82%. Okay, see, uterine artery pulsatility index at 11 to 13 plus 6 weeks. It's clearly given here. Right. So if we include all these things, the detection rate is 82%. Right. If the patient says she had a previous she's having a previous history of preeclampsia, she's having a strong history of hypertension in her family, maternal and paternal side, and she's also having in her siblings, she's having preeclampsia issues. So if in case she's interested to afford all these things, then definitely you can ask the patient, and definitely you can predict the preeclampsia. So these are nice guidelines now. So these are the nice 2019 updated guidelines, right? So you please go through the details of this slide. Okay, right. So how are you going to prevent? Okay, you predicted some patients are at risk, and how are you going to prevent? Yes. So ACOG 2019 guidelines, they said, depending upon the clinical risk factors, you should give aspirin to the patient to prevent the preeclampsia. Right. So what is the dose and when should start? We'll discuss it. First, we will see what are the risk factors. Yes. So the ACOG divided the risk factors into high, moderate, and low risk is nothing but a normal previous delivery, full-term delivery. Okay, that is, aspirin is not recommended, so don't bother about the low risk. Only remember the high risk and moderate risk clinical risk factors. High risk are 6 and moderate risk are 6. These are not that difficult to remember. It is very easy to remember. That Gestosis score is difficult to remember, so don't bother about remembering it unless otherwise it's been asked in the exam. Definitely you should reproduce. Okay, these are very easy to remember and these are helpful in your practice. See, history of preeclampsia, high risk history of preeclampsia comes here. Then multifetal gestation, chronic hypertension, of course you know chronic hypertension, type 1, type 2 diabetes, renal disease, and autoimmune diseases. These are the 6 factors. And see here, 1 or more than 1, you should start the patient on aspirin. Okay, even 1. Even if there is a history of preeclampsia with adverse outcome in previous pregnancy, in such patient, you should start the aspirin, right? So these are the 6. And in moderate, see, almost same, but here there is a family history of preeclampsia in mother or sister, because there is a large percentage of chances of preeclampsia in this patient. Like in twin sister, it's like about in twin sister, it's like about 11 to 22% something. And if there is history in mother, there is 44% around. So definitely that is a strong predictor. So family history. Then see here, age. We saw the same risk factor in Gestosis score, like age older 35 years or more, and personal history of low birth weight, adverse previous pregnancy outcome, and more than 10 years pregnancy interval. This pregnancy interval are also seen in the Gestosis score. So almost same, but try to remember in a precise way so that you could, if in exam they ask, you could reproduce, right? And here it should be more than 1. In moderate risk factors, with one risk factor you cannot start. It should be more than 1, right? Yes, so prevention. So this is what we are talking about. So now you predicted, now you should prevent. Right. So again, this is a FOXY guidelines. So depending upon the FOXY guidelines, aspirin 75 to 150 milligram you can give. There is no optimum dose of aspirin as per now. Till now there is optimum dose. Studies are going on. They did not optimize the dose. So it's unclear. So you can use like 60, 75, 100, 150, which are available in the market. So most of the practitioners, they are using 75 or 150. Okay, right, 150 or 75. If you give 150 to the patient and the patient have any bleeding issues, etc., you can also reduce the dose to 75. Or you can directly start with 75, which is a safe dose, right? Low dose aspirin has a good maternal and fetal safety profile. So these are the FOXY guidelines, ma'am. Please go through these guidelines. What I want to say is, one, about the dose and when to start. So it is better to start earlier. 12 weeks or earlier than 12 weeks, not late than that. Okay, right. And along with the aspirin, calcium should be given in this patients 1 to 1.5 gram daily. Yes, anyone can say why calcium is being given in these patients. Of course, we do give calcium in pregnancy after 12 weeks or 13 weeks routinely, but why specifically in these patients we are mentioning it? Anyone? Yes. Anyone?
No, ma'am.
Pavani?
No, ma'am.
See, try to interact, ma. Then only you can, I think you can gain more knowledge. If it is an interactive session, that will be better. Niharika? Sneha? Anyone, ma? Okay.
Calcium is one of the cause for preeclampsia, and hypocalcemia is also one of the cause for preeclampsia.
No, not, yeah, hypo. You are saying hypo, right?
Hypo, ma'am, yes.
Actually, it is not hypo. See, hypocalcemia is not the correct word. Of course, whatever you said is right in that sense, but not hypocalcemia, low levels of calcium. Because if it is hypocalcemia, the blood levels are so less, the patient will have some clinical features. That is a different thing. In that case, even if it is a preeclampsia case or not, if we are predicting, we'll definitely treat the patient, isn't it? The word is not
Yes.
hypocalcemia. The word is like
Low
low
calcium.
levels of calcium. Yes. So there was a study. So many studies have been done in patients. They detected that the calcium levels are low in such patients. So better to give calcium supplementation. Right. Okay. So this is the diagnostic criteria for preeclampsia. In almost all guidelines, this is given. This is common for every guideline. Okay. In FOXY, in NICE guideline, in everything. Please do remember this. Please do remember this and save this table. This is very important table. Even in the exam, they ask the diagnostic criteria. What is the diagnostic criteria? Just close your eyes and write it down. This is all they are asking about. Okay. So see, you all know the blood pressure greater than equal to 140/90, at least 4 hours apart and after 20 weeks with the previously normal blood pressure. Okay, this is a criteria, right? So if the blood pressure is greater than equal to 160/110, which is a severe thing, the red color indicates the severe thing, the severity. Okay, here according to the FIGO guidelines, FIGO guidelines, very short interval like 5 to 15 minutes is more than enough. Okay, because we should start the timely antihypertensive therapy. Please do not wait for 4 hours. No, never. Again, check the blood pressure of the patient within like 10 to 15 minutes and just start the antihypertensive therapy. Otherwise, there will be a lot of damage to the patient. Right. So proteinuria. Yes. So actually here dipstick reading 1 is given. NICE guidelines say it is 1 plus, but FOXY guidelines, please do follow the FOXY guidelines because as is a low resource setting Indian guidelines. So in our Indian guidelines, it is given like equal to or greater than 2 plus. Then only we call it as proteinuria, dipstick reading. Or else if you are measuring a 24-hour urine collection, it should be like greater than equal to 300 mg. Okay. Right. So that is about proteinuria. Then if there is absence of proteinuria, we are taking proteinuria as the major criteria after the blood pressure. Okay, if there is no proteinuria, then it could be thrombocytopenia, platelet count less than 1 lakh, renal insufficiency in the form of serum creatinine concentrations greater than 1.1 milligram per deciliter. Right. Impaired liver functions, elevated blood concentrations of transaminases, twice to the normal concentration. Right. Then pulmonary edema, cerebral or visual symptoms. So all these red color things, they represent the severity of the disease. Okay. Right. So in practical exam, they can ask you, how are you going to measure the blood pressure? Okay. Right. So the patient must be seated. I'll show you a diagram. Yes, this one. The sitting position, the back should be supported. The arm should be supported and it should be bare. There should not be any clothing around the arm. Right. So if the patient is wearing any dress, you should ask the patient to remove the clothing over the arm. And appropriate size cuff. What is the appropriate size cuff? I will say you. And the cuff should, the middle of the cuff should be at the level of the heart. And from the cubital fossa, the lower end of the cuff should be 2.5 centimeters. Ask the patient to rest for 2 to 3 minutes. The leg should be uncrossed and the feet should be flat on the floor. So these are the things we should ask the patient. And generally what we should do is at first antenatal visit, we should examine both the arms, because to rule out some conditions like, yes, anybody? Why we want to measure the blood pressure of both the arms in first antenatal visit?
Rule out coarctation of aorta.
Very good. So that is the reason. So if any, the patient is having coarctation of aorta, we can easily rule out it by measuring. There will be difference in the blood pressure. So if we want to measure, we should measure in both the arms. Then only the right arm is enough on every visit, right? And systolic blood pressure, Korchkov phase 1, will record it as Korchkov phase 1, and diastolic is Korchkov phase 5, because phase 4 cannot be I mean, in pregnant females, phase 5 is easily audible for us. Okay, so that is the reason why phase 5. Generally, normal patients phase 4 we take. So this is not in detail, but just remember that if in case the examiner asks you questions, it will be helpful, right? So standard cuff size. Standard cuff is 33 centimeters. Remember, it is 33 or less is standard. If the patient is more obese, then you can go for more than 33 centimeters, right? And remember, mercury sphygmomanometer is the gold standard for the blood pressure measurement. If in case we don't have a mercury sphygmomanometer, then we can go for the calibrated and properly standardized Aeronaut digital sphygmomanometer. What are the warning signs? You all know: headache, vomiting, abdominal pain, syncope, blurring vision, all these things you know. Bleeding from the genitalia, pain in the womb. These are the words given in the Foxy. Pain in the womb, hardening of the womb, because these are the normal terms, normal things, like, I mean, patient terminology they gave in this way. And bleeding from the genitalia, these signify the abruptio. And seizures are like we see in the eclampsia. And absent fetal movements, IUFD, reduced fetal movements, distress. So all these things we can ask the patient. These are the warning symptoms and signs. Yes, so this is what I already said. But the thing is, there are studies done on aspirin. In ACOG, it's given by giving the aspirin, there is evidence. What I want to show is the evidence says there is significant reduction in the severe preeclampsia and the fetal restriction. So we should start the aspirin. The same thing in ACOG, it's given the same thing, right? So aspiritrel, there is aspiritrel. So nowadays, examiners, especially in the DNB, they are fond of asking about the trials. Okay, so what is Macpitrel? What is aspiritrel? So they just want to know, they just want to test the knowledge of ours, whether we are updated or not, whether we know about some studies or not, right? So yes, aspiritrel. This is like a story. Just listen like a story. So what happened is the incidence of preeclampsia, preterm preeclampsia, I mean early onset preeclampsia, is being reduced by 62%. Okay, so by predicting and by giving the aspirin, if we could reduce 62%, it's a big thing, isn't it? So out of 100 patients who could land up in preeclampsia, we prevented 62 patients to land in a like preeclampsia. Okay, 62 is a very big number, so it's a good thing. Okay, so if we prevent 62%, it's a great thing. So as aspirin 150 mg, in aspiritrel they gave 150 mg, but it was not effective in the late preeclampsia. Okay, it is effective only in the preterm preeclampsia, that is early onset preeclampsia, right? So what is aspiritrel? It is a prospective You know what is prospective? Forward going study. Multi-center, in so many centers. They did in so many centers in UK, Spain, Italy, Belgium, Greece, and Israel. So in all these countries, they did multi-centric study. And in singleton pregnancies, they took only singleton pregnancies from 11 to 13 plus 6 weeks of gestational age who are attending the routine checkups. In such patients, they started the aspirin. And as we already previously discussed, the multi-marker screening, isn't it? That is maternal factors, MAP, uterine artery pulsatility index, PAPE. PAPE is the extra thing which they tested in the aspirin trial, and placental-like growth factors. By seeing all these things, they started aspirin so that there was a reduction of 62%. Okay, so how we can see the PAPE? Anyone? Yes, Pavani, Sneha, Kavya, anyone ma? What do you know about PAPE? Why I'm asking is, along with the nuchal translucency scan, we ask the patient to go for double marker, isn't it?
Yes.
It's not.
Yes. So what is the second marker? One is beta HCG and second is PAPE, isn't it?
Yes, ma'am.
So in this, I mean, in preventing the preeclampsia, how is it helpful? Okay. So outside routinely, what practitioners do is, if the PAPE value is less than 0.4, they do start aspirin if the patient is having any other risk factors. Okay. So remember in that way, right? Yes, you all know the pathophysiology. So I'm not going in detail about it. It is a 2-stage disorder. This is only for the theory purpose. If you are interested, like to read about it, to write about it, please go through that in respective books. Okay, I'll just finish it in a simple thing. Like 2-stage disorder, in the first stage, there will be faulty endovascular thromboplastic remodeling. Okay, so generally there are 2 waves of thromboplastic invasion. The first wave is around 10 to 12 weeks, and second wave is around 16 to 18 weeks. So in preeclampsia, what happens is second wave is affected. So this is the first stage. Because of this first stage, second stage is clinical stage. There will be clinical issues in the patient, right? So mechanisms, abnormal thromboplastic invasion, and immunological, if we want to say immunologically, that we could, it could be suggestive of the acute graft rejection. And finally, there will be diminished perfusion and hypoxic environment. And this hypoxia will lead to the vasospasm. And actually, there are like anti-angiogenic agents are being released. Okay, because of that anti-angiogenic agents, there will be vasospasm. Right. So this is all about the preeclampsia, eclampsia. I mean hypertensive disorders, etiology, and everything, like definitions, all these things. So further, I want to discuss in case scenario type because it will be helpful for theory and also practical purpose. Right. So case 1 is, please do concentrate. 23-year-old primigravida with a pregnancy of 32 weeks of gestation. She comes for the antenatal visit, and on routine checkup, she is found to be having BP of 150 by 100 mm of Hg. What is the diagnosis? Yes. So what is the diagnosis is the question. But prior to establishing the diagnosis, my question is 1 BP recording enough for this patient? Yes.
No.
No.
Yes. Who is speaking out?
One is
Who is-
not enough, ma'am.
Yeah. So what are you going to do?
After
We have to recheck the BP after 4 hours, ma'am. Again.
Okay, very good. Okay, fine. Let us take 2 case scenarios.
On
In
two
one patient,
occasions, 4 to 6 hours apart, ma'am.
okay, fine.
And check for proteinuria also.
Very good. Okay. First, let us confirm the BP. Okay. See, all the patients cannot afford all the investigations, and unnecessary investigations is the first priority to avoid. Okay. So first, record the BP. Ask the patient to take, like ask the patient to sit for 4 hours. Okay. Or else if she's uncomfortable, you can ask the patient to take rest for 4-5 hours. Then examine the BP. Okay, record the BP. If the BP is again above 140/90, then
Check for proteinuria, ma'am.
right. So first confirm the BP, ma. If in case if it is not above 140 equal to or above 140/90, what are you going to do? Two things can happen, right? In this patient, in one scenario, the BP again second reading can be more than 140/90, and it could not be 140/90. In two case scenarios, what are you going to do? Okay, see, if it is above 140/90 or equal to 140/90, so the BP, like she is a patient with high BP, yes, definitely. You will go for further investigations, proteinuria, if she is having any complaints. Here there is no complete history in this case. So if she is having any complaints, so accordingly, you will ask for the investigations. Clear, right? If the patient is after 4 hours, if the BP is like less than 140/90, then we will try to monitor, we'll try to record the BP every 4 hourly if there is a strong history. Like for example, the patient is previously been marked at risk for preeclampsia, for example, or she is having a strong family history, or she is having a history in previous, like in previous pregnancy, she is having a history of preeclampsia. If there is such type of history, then every 4 hourly you will monitor the patient, like maximum for 24 hours, like that. Okay. If there is no risk factor, then you can ask the patient to come for the regular follow-up. Am I clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. See, repeat the BP after 4 hours for the diagnosis. If the BP is high twice, at least twice. Okay, at least twice, 4 hours apart. Right. Then proteinuria, according to NICE guidelines, it is greater than equal to 1+, and according to the FOXY, it is greater than equal to 2+. So definitely we will follow the FOXY, because FOXY is made in India, and the dipstick reagents you are using is made in India. So go for that. Don't go for NICE. Okay. Right. So history, you'll ask the history. Any loss of any history of headache, loss of consciousness, convulsions, blurring of vision. Just see, if anybody asks you, any examiner asks you, now you should be like, these history should be at the tip of your tongue. You should just go on saying, just go on saying. Okay, you should not stop. So remember this history. History of pain abdomen, leaking PV, bleeding PV. So all these suggests of anyone? Pain abdomen, leaking PV, bleeding PV.
To rule out abruptio placenta, ma'am.
Okay, bleeding PV is abruptio, but pain abdomen, leaking and bleeding suggests
To
you
rule out
preterm labor.
abruption.
Preterm labor, ma.
Yes, ma'am.
Isn't it right? Pain abdomen and only bleeding PV, yes, abruptio. It could be anything. Of course, we'll go for the investigation, but at least by history, you should have some idea, right? History of decreased urine output, passage of red colored urine, yellowish discoloration of urine, fever in the recent past. Why it is important? Yes, fever in the recent past. History of intake of any antihypertensives you should ask. Excessive weight gain, epistaxis, bleeding gums. See, all these things, epistaxis and bleeding gums, to rule out any bleeding disorder. If the patient is complaining of bleeding PV, it could be, we could think it is abruptio, but she could have like epistaxis and bleeding gums. If she is having those, she can have any bleeding disorder also. Okay. History of any renal disease also you should ask, because we should not think at present if she is having any renal abnormalities, lab abnormalities, we should not think it as an end organ damage, because if she is having any renal disease already, it could be because of that, right? Then everything about the history. Next is examination. First, you should examine the vitals of the patient. Okay. BMI is very important. That is why I marked it in like red, because BMI indicates the progression. Okay, progression, right? Then cardiovascular system, signs of congestive cardiac failure. See, every obstetrician, in my view, every obstetrician should know the signs of congestive cardiac failure, please, because like you are, hello, right? So for example, you went for a postpartum rounds or antepartum rounds. In one patient, there are basal crepitations that you could identify with your strength. You can identify with your strength, and there are raised JVPs there. Okay, one of your intern or anyone, out of enthusiasm, they recorded the JVP and said, you ma'am, this patient is having raised JVP and she's dyspneic. They came to you and said that they have dyspnea, complaint of dyspnea, and they measured the pulse. It is greater than 100, and fast breathing. The patient is having fast breathing. The intern will say you, and also the right hypochondrial tenderness is there in such patient. So please do remember, these are all the signs of congestive cardiac failure. You can't say like let it be, or it should strike you. What I mean is, it should strike you that these are the features of congestive cardiac failure, so that you could promptly manage the patient with the help of any physician or cardiologist. Whatever, you can transfer the patient or shift the patient to the intensive care unit. Am I clear? Please remember these 5 things or 6 things. There will be basic repetitions, raised JVP, dyspnea, tachypnea, that is greater than 24 per minute, tachycardia, that is 100, more than 100 per minute, and right hypochondrial tenderness. Okay, right. So see, examination from the vitals, then general examination, then cardiovascular system is very important. Then we are examining the central nervous system. See, every time central nervous system, we say only one word, there is no focal neurological deficit generally. But see, no focal neurological deficit is like, okay, in exams, you can say, not to elaborate the central nervous system examination, sure. But few things, what I think is, you should know few things. See, brisk tendon reflexes are common, and they are results of the central nervous system irritability in severe eclampsia, preeclampsia. Okay, so the tendon reflexes are brisk, so that is normal, that we should know. And it is unusual for preeclamptic patient to have seizures without first showing signs of the nervous system irritability. So what I want to say is, I saw few patients in my PG shift. They are like, they are so different by looking them. See, when I saw the patient's face, I felt something is wrong with the patient. And after few minutes, I saw the patient, she landed up in eclampsia. Okay, so there will be like facial edema. She will be very confused. I saw some patients, they are like disoriented. They are so confused. Okay, such patients, they will land up in eclampsia. Please remember, in your practice, if you see such patients, you think they could land up in preeclampsia, land up in eclampsia. So start the treatment immediately. Start the investigations, diagnose her, and start the treatment investigation, treatment immediately. So this is important point to remember. Next, fundus examination. Why fundus examination is important in preeclamptic patient? Yes, anyone? Yes, in chronic hypertension, it is important. We all know. Yes, Pavni, can you answer why fundus examination is important in preeclamptic patient?
To rule out any papilledema or increased intracranial pressure, ma'am.
Yeah, very good. So see, in chronic hypertension, the vein artery ratio, all these things are increased. Hemorrhages we can see, exudates we can see, right? These are all suggestive of chronic hypertension. But papilledema is also seen in chronic hypertension, but it could be seen in preeclampsia. Okay, so increased intracranial, it suggestive of increased intracranial tension, but definitely we can see sometimes in preeclampsia, and we should check for the HELP syndrome, and we should terminate the pregnancy. So what I want to say is, if in fundal examination we see papilledema type of things, definitely we should think of termination. Okay, it is not specific for preeclampsia, but we can see. That is what I want to say, right? See, papilledema is not a common finding in preeclampsia. It is suggestive of possibly brain tumor causing increased intracranial pressure and secondary hypertension. But rarely papilledema is suggestive of fulminating nature of the disease, where termination of pregnancy is required. So please remember these things. These are few things which you won't find in books. Even if you find, they won't be like highlighted. So I just want to highlight these things. So one, papilledema is important, and second thing is, and it is like first showing signs of nervous system. Without showing the signs of nervous system, the patient will not land up in seizures, most of the patients. So as an obstetrician, You should identify the signs of nervous system irritability. Right. So obstetric examination is very important. We all know. Yes. So case 2. So please remember, concentrate on this case. 27-year-old primi gravida with a pregnancy of 32 weeks of antenatal visit, and on routine checkup, she is having a BP of 150 by 100 mm of Hg on 2 occasions 4 hours apart. And how will you manage the patient? So don't say all the previous things, ma. We already came up to the obstetric examination. Okay. We already in previous case, we saw the BP recording. We recorded the BP twice 4 hours apart, same like this patient. Next, proteinuria. Next, all the examination part, history part we completed, examination part completed. Okay. Now you say the management. What in the sense? Investigations. From the investigation, you start. Yes. Kavya, Pavani, anyone? Sneha?
Ma'am, based on proteinuria, we can
Very good. See, what I want to say is 32 weeks, isn't it? Okay. It could be gestational hypertension also. Why not? It could be preeclampsia also. Okay. First, proteinuria, definitely. If it is negative, can you say this is a gestational hypertension patient?
no, ma'am,
Why?
because of a BP recording, 2 BP recordings,
Okay. Let us think like she is having high BP.
4 hours apart.
No problem, no issues. She is having high BP. For example, see, what is the difference between gestational hypertension and preeclampsia? Proteinuria, isn't it? So think this is a patient with definitive high BP. She is being diagnosed. Definitely she is having high BP, but proteinuria is negative. My question is, can you say this is a gestational hypertension?
No, ma'am, we have to rule out other end organ damage also.
Okay, for example, there is no end organ damage.
Then it can be, ma'am.
It can be, right? It
just
can be. But my question is, can you say definitely it is gestational?
And we go for
No, see, I'll explain you.
no.
You can't say, because one thing is, according to the Foxy guidelines, after 42nd day postpartum, only you can diagnose the gestational hypertension. Okay. If the patient after the 42nd day, she is having normal BP, then you can say she is gestational hypertension. One thing. Okay. And see here, she is 32 weeks. Okay. 32 weeks means now if it is, there is no end organ damage, there is no proteinuria, maybe she is not a early onset preeclampsia. After 34 weeks, she can be a late onset preeclampsia, isn't it? It could be that case also. Okay. I just want to give some clarity. Am I clear? Anyone?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Right, right. See, first thing, what you want to say is admit the patient. Admit the patient. Why we should admit the patient? Because she is having high BP twice. That is enough for making the diagnosis that she is hypertensive in pregnancy. Okay, she is related to hypertensive disorders in pregnancy. So admit the patient first, confirm the diagnosis, and rule out the severity of the disease. 4-hourly BP monitoring, you should do every 4-hourly BP monitoring. You should send all the investigations, as you said, to rule out the end organ damage, like complete blood picture, quantification of urine, LFTs, KFTs, LDH also. Who knows, she may have HELLP syndrome, we don't know. So for the first visit, for all the investigation you should send. If the platelet count is less, then PT, APTT also. Fundus examination, as previously we discussed. And coming to the fetal investigation, we should ask the mother to record the daily fetal kick count, right? And NST biweekly, biophysical profile biweekly, and Doppler of umbilical artery and middle cerebral artery. So these are the investigations. I think everybody knows all these investigations, right? So in ultrasonography, these are given in Foxy guidelines. They clearly gave everything about the ultrasonography. Please take the screenshot of this, or in the Foxy guidelines, you can go just once go through this. What should we see in ultrasonography? What is the maternal ultrasonography, and what is the fetal surveillance and the placental morphology that we should concentrate in an ultrasonography? Okay, the examiners can ask you what you should see in an ultrasonography, right? Yes. So the patient says, this patient says, doctor, I'll go home. I have another baby. Actually, this is a primary gravida. Chalo, think it is a second gravida. I have another baby. I should take care of the baby. I'll go home. Yes. So anyone, do you want to send this patient home or not? Of course, it depends upon the investigation. Let us think. Everything is normal. There is no end organ damage. And after you gave the antihypertensive drugs, her BP was maintained like less than 150 by 100. Your target is, actually the target BP is 140 by 90, according to the FOXY and also according to the NICE guidelines. Okay. So it is being maintained. So what do you think? Can you send the patient home? Yes.
Yes, we can send.
On what basis, ma? I mean, how are you so sure?
We have to ask the patient to record her blood pressures twice daily or every 6 hours, ma'am. We have to ask her to, we have to explain her in a proper way to check for the fetal movements. And if it is available, then dipstick test should be done daily once with morning sample, ma'am. And we have to ask her to visit the hospital every weekly and do the maternal and fetal assessment, ma'am. The test should be repeated every weekly.
Very good. So on weekly basis, we can ask the patient to come and visit the antenatal care, and we can allow the patient for outpatient basis. But yes, two things are important. The patient and the family members should understand the sense of the disease. Watch what type of disease is it, what are the implications of the disease, how the mother is affected, how the baby is affected. We should explain, we should counsel the patient and the patient attendants in detail. And we should ask to record the daily blood pressure and if possible, daily dipstick urine protein, right? And weekly, ask the patient to get the daily recordings of all this. Okay, in that sense, yes. And one more thing is 24/7, there should be communication and also the transport facility. If the patient is from a very remote area, you can't allow the patient to go for the outpatient basis. Okay, she can come to the hospital at any time because she can land up in abruptia, she can land up in eclampsia. At any time, she can land up in any of the complications. Okay, am I clear? Yes, am I clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So see, the same thing I'm saying, weekly ANC with BP recordings and urine albumin daily, and ANC visit. Ask at every ANC visit, you ask the patient for the symptoms of end organ damage at every visit, not only at the first visit, at every visit, because the patients don't know it. We as doctors, we as the healthcare individuals, we know the importance of them. Okay, and also examine the proteinuria again at every weekly. And antenatal growth charting is very important. Every week, monitor the weight gain of the patient, fundal height of the patient, abdominal girth measurements are important. If there is like abdominal girth increase, we can suspect, like if she's having pain, we can suspect abruptia, etc., etc. It will be helpful in some way. Okay, then continue the weekly assessment. If the findings are normal till 37 weeks, we can allow the patient on an outpatient basis, and after 37 weeks we can terminate if needed. Okay, or else if we can continue if it is a gestational hypertension. Okay, right. Who requires the admission? The opposite. Till we discussed what all we discussed, the opposite of that require the admission. Like for example, the patient is having proteinuria or the BP is greater than 150 by 100 mm of Hg, decreased or absent fetal movements, maternal symptoms are suggestive of end organ damage. In all the conditions, the patient requires the admission, right? So termination of pregnancy is the only cure. We know that, but we will try to prolong the pregnancy. We try to prevent the convulsions. We'll try to prevent the serious end organ damage, and we'll try to deliver a healthy infant with the least maternal morbidity. So these are the objectives of an obstetrician. So antihypertensives, please go through this. You already know labetalol, dose, all those things. I'm not going in detail through the theory part. So nifedipine, labetalol, hydralazine, and methyl dopa is also very important. Go through these drugs. What is the dosage? What are the contraindications? What is the maximum dosage? Which is the first line drug? All these questions they will ask. And what are the contraindications for each drug, they will ask. Right, case scenario 3. 30-year-old G3 P2 L2 with 34 weeks of period of gestation has come to the casualty with BP of 160/110 and complaints of headache. Her urine albumin on dipsticks is 2+. What is the diagnosis? Yes, anyone?
Severe preeclampsia, ma'am.
Severe preeclampsia.
Severe preeclampsia, ma'am.
What else, ma? Complaints of headache is there.
Imminent eclampsia.
She is a severe preeclampsia patient with impending features. Okay, she can land up in eclampsia because she is giving complaint of headache. If we don't control the BP promptly, she can land up in eclampsia. This is a very important point to remember. If once she land up in eclampsia, the prognosis will be very poor. Right. See, headache is an impending sign of eclampsia. So antihypertensive labetalol is the first line agent, and you should start the seizure prophylaxis. See, in NICE guidelines, they gave few things. I'll show you when to start the max sulfate. So see, now all of you are PGs, you see the patients, and do you seriously know when to start the max sulfate and when not to start? Yes? Yes, anyone? Yes, ma'am. Okay, I'll say you. According to the NICE guidelines, there is a protocol when to start the max sulfate. I'll say you. See, what we follow is the Pritchard regime. So I want to say about the MACP trial. Okay. MACP trial. In MACP trial, max sulfate has, they said that max sulfate has definite role in treatment of severe preeclampsia. And the incidence of preeclampsia is 2.7% in placebo group. It versus 1.1% in the max sulfate group. Okay. So in this trial, they took two groups. In one group, they gave max sulfate. In other group, they didn't give. So they saw the incidence. So there was decrease in the incidence of eclampsia. So this is what about the MACP trial. See, in NICE 2019, they gave the features in 1.8.3 guidelines recommendation. There are the features. See, I highlighted, consider giving intravenous max sulfate to the women with severe preeclampsia who are in critical care setting if birth is planned within 24 hours. Okay, we'll try to deliver the patient by vaginal delivery. If not possible, depending upon the gestational age, adequacy of the pelvis, depending upon the Bishop score, all these things. Okay, we'll see. If possible, we'll go for the vaginal delivery. If not possible, we should, if the mother condition is so critical, she is severely preeclamptic, and we should terminate, definitely we should terminate the pregnancy. So we'll go for cesarean section if there is no imminent birth within 24 hours. Or else if there is any indication, obstetric indication or medical indication for termination and indication for cesarean, we'll go for cesarean section. Right. So see, consider the need for max sulfate treatment if one or more of the following features of preeclampsia is present. Right. See, ongoing or recurring severe headaches. Like the patient is going on complaining the headache. You gave her paracetamol, you gave some, definitely you can't give painkillers to the patient. So you gave her paracetamol, it did not relieve. So the headache is not relieving on medications. Okay, that is an important feature. So ongoing or recurring severe headaches, visual scotomata, nausea or vomiting, which is not relieving on medication, epigastric pain, not relieving on medication, oliguria and severe hypertension, progressive deterioration in laboratory blood tests. Okay, all these conditions, one or more features, then you can start the max sulfate. Yes. So expectant management in case of severe preeclampsia, is it possible? Most obstetricians would like to terminate the pregnancy in severe preeclampsia if reasonable maturity of the fetus is present. So what I want to say is, for example, India is a diverse country. If we are in a remote area where we don't have any NICU setup, in such conditions, of course, this patient should deliver in a tertiary care center, definitely. But every tertiary care center is not the same. Okay, so depending upon the NICU setup, what I want to say is, depending upon the NICU setup, For example, AIMS Delhi or Safdarjung Delhi, they can easily manage 25 weeks or 28 weeks fetus. They can make them survive. Okay. For example, in our Karimnagar, tertiary care centers are medical colleges. Can our medical college manage such patient, such fetus, such baby like more than 1 kg or 28 weeks? No. So that is what I want to say. If we can manage, if we can make the baby survive, then we can terminate. Okay. Otherwise, definitely we should transfer, send the mother to a tertiary care center where there is a good NICU setup. Okay. Right. Yes, maternal conditions prohibiting the expectant management. We already know if uncontrolled BP is there, then we should terminate. If eclampsia, yes, it is an indication for termination. HELP syndrome, indication for termination. Visual disturbances, yes, she can lose her eyes, vision. So it is an indication for termination. Like we said, papilledema is an indication for termination. What happens is there will be detachment of the retina due to the edema. The patient couldn't see. After delivery, after in the postpartum, after few weeks, I think the patient will regain her resolving the edema. The edema will resolve and then regain her retina will be detached because of the edema. Not complete detachment. Complete detachment is not curable. This is like because of the edema, it will be pushed forward. Then it will settle down back. Then she can see. In some cases, it do happen. So we should prevent the complete loss of vision. Then epigastric pain, right upper quadrant pain. All these things are, they prohibit the expectant management. We should terminate the pregnancy. Like all other condition, you know all these things: pulmonary edema, vaginal bleeding, or acute placental abruption. Abruption is an indication for termination. Then worsening or new renal dysfunction, the serum creatinine greater than 1.1 or twice baseline. Yes, this is an indication. And fetal conditions, you know, fetal distress, fetal death, persistent reversed end diastolic flow in the umbilical artery Doppler. When we are monitoring the patient, if we see this reversed end diastolic flow, it is persistent, then definitely we should terminate. Am I clear? Are you listening? Yes?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, ma'am.
See, yeah. See, these are nice guidelines, ma. The same thing, what all I said previously, the same thing, but I want to say like 2-3 more points I want to add. The first point, see, inability to control the maternal blood pressure despite using 3 or more classes of antihypertensives. Okay, this is what the new one we do, which we don't know. If the blood pressure is not controlling, yes, definitely. Even when you are using 2 or 3 classes of hypertensives, it's not controlling, yes. Right, then pulse oximeter, maternal pulse oximeter is showing less than 90%. And all others are same: progressive deterioration of all the lab parameters, ongoing neurological features, placental abruption, reversed end diastolic flow of the umbilical artery Doppler, all are same. Okay, so finally only few slides are left. These are all nice guidelines. What I'll say, what are the highlighting things? See, we admitted the patient. In FOXI guidelines, they didn't give how frequently we should monitor a patient after admitting in the hospital. Okay. For outpatient basis, we said that daily once we'll ask the patient to monitor, record it, and get that back to us when she comes for the weekly assessment. Isn't it? Right. When we admit the patient in hospital, how you are going to monitor the patient? Right. So first we will divide the patient degree of hypertension into hypertension. We know that it is a non-severe type and severe type. So you are making 2 columns, right? So in non-severe type, if there are any clinical concerns, what I mean is any end organ damage or proteinuria, then we will admit the patient. Okay, so admission is required then, right? And in severe hypertension, definitely will admit the patient. Okay, coming to the blood pressure measurement, target blood pressure is different. Target blood pressure in NICE guidelines is 135/85, but please don't remember this. In FOXI, according to the FOXI, it is 140/90 itself. Okay, 140/90 itself. Remember that. So after giving the antihypertensives, what is the blood pressure that you should maintain? Less than 140/90. Right. So how we are going to measure the blood pressure? See, at least every 48 hours. In a non-severe type of patient, at least once 2 days. It is enough. In preeclampsia, I'm saying. In preeclampsia. Okay. Right. And if, in severe hypertensive, in severe preeclampsia patient, it is every 15 to 30 minutes until the BP is less than 160 by 110. Okay, am I clear? Every 15 to 30 minutes until it is severe. Then at least 4 times daily. This is very important, ma. We should examine the patient 4 times daily. Whereas in non-severe type, only once every 2 days is enough, right? So, see, dipstick method of proteinuria testing only at the admission, only at the diagnosis. For diagnosing preeclampsia, it should be like proteinuria should be there, right? Only at the admission, and if needed clinically, then only we should repeat, right? Fetal assessment. If we'll see the fetal heart auscultation, we'll go for the ultrasound assessment. We'll do a CTG. In this ultrasound assessment, if it is normal at the first visits, we will repeat every 2 weekly. Okay. Even in the severe type also, we'll repeat every 2 weekly. This is all about preeclampsia. Yes. Am I clear? This is all about preeclampsia. Anyone? Just say yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, right. Next, coming to the gestational hypertension. Okay, these are all nice guidelines. These tables are all nice guidelines. Why I'm saying is, see, if you're confident when to check the patient, when to record the blood pressure measurement, you will be confident about the treatment. Okay, monitoring is very important in such patients. If you monitor promptly, then only you can give the treatment promptly. Okay, right. So in gestational hypertension patient, you may have a doubt why it is different for preeclampsia patient, why it is different for gestational hypertension patient. Yes, I'll say. See, in non-severe type, it is not non-severe. The BP is 140 to 160 by 110 in between. In gestational hypertension, definitely admission is not needed. You can manage the patient on an outpatient basis, right? Because it is severe hypertension, even gestational hypertension, it is severe. So definitely you should admit the patient to control the BP with the IV injections or all these things. Okay, you should definitely control the BP, right? So the blood pressure here in the outpatient basis, once or twice a week is more than enough in gestational hypertension. Again, same. See, 15 to 30 minutes until the BP is like above 160 by 110. So any type of hypertension, whether it is gestational hypertension or preeclampsia, if it is severe, then definitely you should examine the patient every 15 to 30 minutes. Please do remember this, right? Coming to dipstick proteinuria. Why it is different for preeclampsia? Because see, we don't know whether this is a gestational hypertension patient or a preeclampsia patient. She could turn out to be a preeclampsia. There are chances. What I want to say is there are chances this gestational hypertension patient can turn out to be a preeclampsia. To make sure that whether she is a preeclampsia or a gestational hypertension, we will repeat the dipstick proteinuria once or twice a week. Okay. In severe type of patient, we will do the dipstick proteinuria daily. Am I clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, this is the difference. Why we are repeating the dipstick proteinuria is we should know. We don't know whether she is a gestational hypertension or preeclampsia. And if she is having severe BP, then daily we should do, right? So blood tests also at presentation and then weekly we will do. Same reason. Okay, what blood tests? Full blood count, liver function test, renal function test. We don't know. The patient at any time can land up in end organ failure, isn't it? So she can land up at any time. So we will monitor the patient weekly basis. So weekly we will repeat. So what you learned today is in gestational hypertension patient, meticulous monitoring is important, isn't it? Every weekly we are doing the blood test. And daily we are doing the dipstick test if the BP is very high in gestational hypertension patient. Am I clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. So meticulous monitoring is very important in gestational hypertension patient. What we thought previously is in preeclampsia, it is very important to monitor the patient. We should take care of the patient very well. But no, even in the gestational hypertension patient, we used to think now gestational hypertension means, yeah, it's okay. It's like, okay, it's not so severe disease. We can manage it, but no. We don't know up till 48 42nd day of postpartum, we don't know the patient is gestational hypertension, right? In the same way, fetal heart auscultation we'll do at every antenatal appointment. Ultrasonic assessment we'll do at every 2 to 4 weeks here. In preeclampsia, we did every 2 weekly. But if it is severe hypertension, even in the gestational hypertension, we'll go for 2 weekly assessment, right? So I think this is the last case. We'll wind up with this case. So see, 23-year-old primary gravida with 8 months of amenorrhea came to the gynae OPD casualty with history of 2 episodes of seizures. Okay, on examination, she is conscious. BP is 160/110. Urine albumin is 2+. Prior to the seizures, she had severe headache. Fundal height corresponds to the gestational age. Fetal heart sounds is 149 BPM. And she refused history of hypertension in pre-pregnancy period. What is the diagnosis and what is the management? Anyone?
Eclampsia.
Right. So we know she is a eclampsia patient. So see, when the word eclampsia entered into the scene, resuscitation is the word we should come with the eclampsia. Okay. First, resuscitate the patient. First, stabilize the patient. Stabilization of the patient is the first step in the management. Please, I repeat again, if the examiner asks you, so what are you going to do first? You are going to stabilize the patient. Till then, see, till now, we were talking about preeclampsia. We were talking about the first step is blood pressure measurement, confirming the blood pressure, proteinuria, then all those things we were talking. But now, when the eclampsia came, it is an emergency obstetric condition. Okay, so it is an emergency obstetric condition. So stabilization is very important. Then you will see the vitals. You will take the patient into a dark eclamptic room, and the bed should have bed rails because the patient will be disoriented, unconscious. She may fall from the bed. You will make the patient in the lateral decubitus position. Keep the airway clean and patent by frequent oral suctioning. If intubation is required, intubate her. And see, remember, pulse oximeter is very, very, very important. Every eclampsia patient there should be attached pulse oximeter to the patient. Okay, because when the SpO2 is less than 96%, we will give the patient oxygen by mask at 8 to 10 liters per minute. Okay, if there is a history of convulsions or hypoxia is SpO2 less than 9. So there should be pulse oximeter. If the pulse oximeter shows 96%, less than 96%, start the patient on oxygen. Of course, we'll start eclampsia patient with oxygen prior to seeing all these things. But what the pulse oximeter says is need for intubation. Okay, and quick history and examination is very important. Take fast history from the attendees and examine the patient and start the max sulfate dose. You already know the max sulfate dose. So see, everybody listen. For the loading dose, there is no need to check anything. The loading dose you can give at any time. Like you can start the loading dose. Only for the maintenance dose, you should check the deep tendon reflexes, urine output, and respiratory rate. Many of the examiners, this is a almost every examiner, they ask this question: is there any need to do any test prior to the loading dose of max sulfate? You should say no. Okay, there is no need to examine anything prior to loading dose or do any test prior to loading dose. You can give the loading dose. Only for the maintenance dose, you should check the deep tendon reflexes, urine output, and respiratory rate. Right. So this is the Pritchard regime. You already know, but only see. This is from the FOXI guidelines. I think. No. This is from AOGD. Right. Maintenance dose will be given only if the following parameters are present. See, in this second box, it's given the maintenance dose will be given only if the following parameters are present. Okay, the respiratory rate should be greater than 16. The patellar reflexes should be present. The urine output should be greater than 100 ml in the last 4 hours. This is for the oliguria. This is definition for the oliguria, right? So these are the things you should examine, and please do remember these things, right? Yes. So after stabilization, what are you going to do? Catheterize the patient, do the parvaginal examination. In parvaginal examination, depending upon the gestational age, see the Bishop scoring, adequacy of the pelvis, what is the presenting part, everything. Okay. is the vaginal delivery possible or not. Okay, it should be noted that cesarean section in eclampsia has higher mortality and morbidity than the vaginal delivery. So please do remember, if only needed, go for the cesarean section in eclampsia patient. Okay, if vaginal delivery is possible, definitely go for the vaginal delivery because the mortality and morbidity is high in the cesarean section, right? So what are the indications of LSCS? You already know. One is the obstetric indication, like cephalopelvic disproportions, transverse lie, malpresentation, placenta previa, all the obstetric indication. And then if the fits are uncontrolled or not responding to the anticonvulsant therapy, yes, definitely you should go for the LSCS. Yes. Finally, about the postpartum. What are the postpartum considerations and recommendations? So why are we bothered about the postpartum? Anyone? Pavani, Sneha, Kavya, anyone? Ma? Why are we bothered about the postpartum? Am I
Risk of complications, ma'am.
okay? Fine, risk of complications. And second thing is, there are chances of landing the patient in eclampsia in postpartum. Postpartum eclampsia we can see. Okay, and also in postpartum, whether in some cases, what happens is the BP is normal in the antepartum for some patients. They suddenly develop high BP in the postpartums. See, in NICE guidelines, it's been given 8%. 8% cases they develop high BP in postpartum. So BP monitoring is very, very, very important in the postpartum. Okay, right. So these are all the postpartum monitoring, postpartum things. I took everything from the NICE guidelines. FOXI guidelines did not provide anything about the postpartum monitoring. But see, we know antepartum and postpartum both are equally important. We can't leave the patient in the postpartum. We can't say, now you are not pregnant, you are not my patient. No, definitely not. Okay, so postpartum monitoring is very, very important. See, so this is in chronic hypertension. What we will do is, in women with chronic hypertension who gave birth, in the first 2 days, we'll examine the patient daily BP, and then once in third and fifth day, because this is a chronic hypertension patient, and antihypertensives we'll give clinically indicated if we can give the antihypertensives, and the aim is to keep the blood pressure lower than 140/90 and continue the antihypertensive treatment if required, and ask the patient to come at 2 weeks after birth. Okay, so 2 weeks after birth, we'll ask the patient to come 2 weeks after birth. And if the patient is taking methyl dopa antepartum, we will ask the patient to stop the methyl dopa and we give another alternative antihypertensives. Yes, anyone can say why we will stop the methyl dopa in postpartum? Anyone?
Postpartum depression.
Because of side effect depression, ma'am.
Yeah, the main
Postpartum
side,
depression.
there are so many issues with the methyl dopa, but the main thing is generally the patients are prone for depression in the postpartum. And if we give methyl dopa, the depression is very high. Okay, because methyl dopa itself causes the postpartum depression. So that is the reason. In every guideline, they ask to stop the methyl dopa. Okay, they ask to stop the methyl dopa, and we will replace it with other hypertensives. Right. So within 2 days, we'll ask to stop, and we'll give alternative antihypertensive. And after 2 weeks, again ask the patient to come at 6 to 8 weeks. That's it. Okay, right. See, this is about the preeclampsia. Previously, what we saw is chronic hypertension, because we know she is a chronic hypertension. First 2 days we will examine daily, then third to fifth day at once, only once is enough. Then we'll give her antihypertensives if needed. We'll ask to come her at 2 weeks, and then 6 to 8 weeks, and we'll ask to stop the methyl dopa. These were the for chronic hypertension, right? So here for the preeclampsia patient, see, at least 4 times a day. Okay, at least 4 times a day when the patient is inpatient. It is very important because she can go for like severe preeclampsia. We don't know. Only monitoring will say us, right? And once, at least once between day 4 and day 3 and day 5. Why the difference? Anybody? First 2 days, why it is important, and why day 3 to day 5 only once is enough? Anyone? Yes, ma. Anyone? If you don't know, you can say don't know. Anyone, ma? Make it fast.
Chances of landing into eclampsia are more in first 2 days, ma'am.
Okay, let us think. Anyone? Anything else? Yes. See, auto transfusion, isn't it? Yes. After the baby is out for the first 48 hours, the BP will be high. Am I right?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, due to the contraction, retraction of the uterus, the blood in the maternal circulation, previously it used to flow through the placenta to the fetus. Everything will be into the mother's cardiovascular system. So the BP will be high. Didn't you observe in the postpartum, immediate postpartum patients? So that is the reason why we monitor the patient more frequently for the first 2 days. Okay, right. So see, for the first 2 days, like it is 4 times a day, then only once between day 3 and day 5. Here the BP will be reduced later on. So that is the reason why we decrease the intensity of monitoring. Then alternate days until the normal. Okay, normal in the sense below the target, below 140/90. Then we will discharge the patient. We can discharge the patient on antihypertensive treatments. Right. Then we'll ask the patient same. Then we'll ask the patient to come 2 weekly checkup, and then we'll ask the patient to come 6 to 8 weekly checkup. Please go through these guidelines. In Google, you can get all the guidelines of NICE 2019 hypertensive disorders in pregnancy. Okay, download the PDF and go through those guidelines. Right. And all these are same guidelines. They just give what to do when the patient is on antihypertensive treatments. If the patient is not on antihypertensive treatments, all these things are being given. Just go through this. Yes, hematological monitoring also, not only about the BP monitoring, when to repeat the hematological and biochemical monitoring is also being given. Okay, please go through these guidelines. This is about the critical care. For example, the patient is in ventilator, level 3 care. Okay, and if she is needing a ventilator, that is a level 3 care. Then step down. In step down, what are the complications we can face? And then next step down is level 1 care, that is preeclampsia with hypertension. These are all like, if you want to know about the critical care level, then you can go through these guidelines. Okay. Yes. Finally, we're asking the patient to go home. And finally, we are giving the patient advice about the contraception. See, in exam, when you are talking about the obstetric case, antenatal period, examination, investigation, all these management, then postnatal care, postpartum, they'll ask you questions. Finally, about the contraception and sending the patient home, discharging the patient. This is a process. If the examiner is asking all these things, then you will pass out. If you are answering all these things, you will pass out. It is a simple thing. Okay, contraception is must. See, this is according to the CDH and WHO medical eligibility criteria. I took from that table. Okay, and if the hypertension is adequately controlled, excluding the combined oral contraceptive pills, copper IUCD, LNG IUCD, implant, and POPs are category 1. Okay, I think you all know the category, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes? You all know the category, right? Isn't it? Should I tell? Okay, fine. Chalo. It's a matter of, it's a matter of 1 minute. I'll just say. See, category, there are 4 categories. Category 1 is without any hesitation, you can give. Okay. So if it is adequately controlled, you can give category 1. These are category 1. You can give to the patient without any hesitation. No issues. You can give to the patient, right? Category 2 is benefits are more than risk. Simply remember these things. Okay. Category 2 is benefits are more than risks. So DMPA is category 2 for the adequately controlled hypertension. So what does it mean? Yes, you can definitely give to the patient. Nobody will question you. Why did you give the patient? Because benefits are more than risks. But definitely the patient is having the risk. In category 1, there is no risk. Okay, right. Category 3. See, combined oral contraceptive pills are category 3. What does the category 3 mean? Risks are more than benefits. The patient is at risk. See, a little bit of red background is being given, pink background is given. It means the patient is in danger. You should never give such pills. Because, yes, anyone, why combined oral contraceptive pills are category 3? We should know, ma. You should already know this. Pavani?
Thromboembolic complications.
Yes?
Risk of thromboembolic complications post-op period.
Anything else? Yeah, true. Right. Very good. Anything else? Because she is a high BP patient, ma. They are having blood pressure issues. The combined oral contraceptive pills again increase the blood pressure. You are giving antihypertensive medications to control the blood pressure one side, and you can't give the oral contraceptive pills, right? Because they increase the blood pressure.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, right. So there are risks for that. And category 4 is absolute contraindication. You should never give category 4. See, for vascular disease and for systolic blood pressure in this table, you see greater than 160 by 110, the combined oral contraceptive pills are category 4. As Pavani said, they have the risk of thromboembolism. So that is the reason you should never give. So you should never give means you should first know. So this table is very, very, very important. Please go through this table and see, analyze it. Don't remember it blindly. Why it is category 2, why it is category 3, you should know. Then you can easily answer. There are no issues. Okay, right. Okay, thanks a lot. Thank you for participating. I hope this session is very helpful. Okay, any questions? Anybody have any doubts? Yes?
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, ma'am.